Stop the ceremony.
Doors were already open when she realized she should not be here. White flowers lined the aisle in quiet perfection, their scent heavy in the air, pressing against her lungs until breathing felt like something she had to remember how to do. The room was full of low voices and polished stillness, the kind of calm that only existed in places where nothing was allowed to go wrong. She tightened her grip on the small hand in hers. "Mama," the boy whispered, looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "Is this the place?" Her chest tightened. "Yes," she said softly, even though she wasn't sure anymore. "Just stay close to me." She had told herself she would stand at the back, that she would leave the envelope quietly with someone in a dark suit and disappear before anyone noticed her face. She had rehearsed it in her mind all the way here, in the cab, in the elevator, in the mirror of the restroom where she had nearly turned around twice. But the moment her son tugged her hand, tired and curious and completely unaware of where they were, the plan unraveled. So she stepped inside, just one step. The marble floor was cold beneath her shoes, too polished, too unforgiving. This was not her world anymore. It hadn't been for years. She lowered her head instinctively, letting her hair fall forward, hoping anonymity would protect her the way it always had. One row, then another. No one stopped her. No one questioned the woman in the simple dress, standing at the edge of a life she no longer belonged to. Until the music faltered, just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but she noticed. Because across the room someone stopped moving, someone important. She felt it before she saw it, that unmistakable pressure in the air, the shift that happened when control changed hands without a word being spoken. Slowly, deliberately, his head lifted. The man at the front of the room stood in a tailored suit that fit him like authority itself. His posture was straight, composed, as though nothing in the world had ever forced him to react instead of decide. The room seemed to wait with him. It landed and stayed. Her heart stumbled painfully in her chest. She had spent years convincing herself that this moment would never happen, that the past could stay buried if she never went looking for it. But the past had eyes, and it had found her. She tightened her grip on her son's hand as his small fingers curled trustingly around hers. Across the room, the man spoke, quietly. "Stop the ceremony." The words were not raised, they were not sharp, they were final. The room obeyed before anyone fully understood why. The officiant froze. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Conversations died mid-breath. One by one, people stepped back, clearing space without being told to do so. That was when she truly understood how much power he still held. Not the kind that needed to announce itself, the kind that simply existed. Her first instinct was to leave. She turned, heart racing, every survival instinct screaming at her to run before this became something she could never undo. But her son tightened his grip again. "Mama?" he asked softly, forcing a smile that felt brittle at the edges. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're okay." But it wasn't, because she felt him before she saw him, own reflection. He stood close now, not invading, not crowding, just there. Rachel. Her name, spoken carefully, as if it still mattered. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She hadn't planned for him to know. Not like this, not today. The room emptied without argument. No raised voices, no panic, just quiet obedience. They were alone near the altar now. Her, the man she had once loved, and the child standing slightly in front of her as if instinctively shielding her without knowing why. That frightened her more than anything else. The man's gaze dropped to the boy, not with suspicion, with calculation. "How old is he?" he asked. She hesitated, then told the truth. 4. A pause followed. Not disbelief, not anger, consideration. "You didn't tell me," he said evenly. Her throat burned. "I didn't think you wanted to know." Silence stretched between them, not threatening, heavy. "You decided that for me?" "Yes." Because survival had required it, Because loving him once had nearly destroyed her. She lifted her chin, refusing to shrink now. "I'm not asking for anything," she said quietly. His gaze moved back to the child, to the way the boy stood firm despite his small size, protective without understanding why. "You came here," he said. She swallowed. "I came to say goodbye." The words cracked something open inside her. A truth she had carried alone for too long. She didn't know then that goodbye was the one thing he would never allow. They sat later in a quiet room away from the ceremony. No guards, no audience, just time. He offered her water, she accepted. That alone felt like a shift in gravity. "You're not leaving tonight," he said calmly. She stiffened. "I didn't come to be kept." His gaze met hers, steady. "You came because you were tired of running." Her breath caught, because he was right. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, didn't raise his voice. He waited, and somehow that felt more intimate than anything else ever had. "He stays with you," he said, nodding toward the boy. "Always." Her eyes burned. "And me?" Another pause. Then, "You decide?" Safety, choice, time. The things she had never believed he could give. She looked down at her son, then back at the man who had once been her undoing, and realized, with a sudden clarity that made her chest ache, this was not the ending she had prepared for. This was the beginning of a reckoning she could no longer outrun, because the man she had come to say goodbye to was no longer willing to let her disappear. The room they were given was quiet in a way that made every breath feel louder than it should have been. Not a holding room, not an interrogation space. A sitting room, soft chairs, low lighting, thick curtains drawn halfway across tall windows that overlooked a city pretending nothing had changed. Rachel sat on the edge of the couch, her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap as if posture alone could keep the past from closing in. Her son sat beside her, legs swinging gently, already distracted by the faint hum of traffic far below. Across from them, the man who had once been the center of her world stood near the window. He hadn't taken off his jacket. That alone told her this wasn't over. The wedding had been dismissed quietly, guests escorted out with practiced smiles and murmured reassurances. The woman who had been meant to stand beside him at the altar had left without a scene, her dignity intact, but her eyes cold with a promise Rachel didn't miss. Everything had been handled cleanly, too cleanly. "You should have told me," he said at last. His voice wasn't raised. It wasn't sharp. It was restrained. That frightened her more than anger ever could. Rachel lifted her chin. "I didn't come to rewrite your life." "You walked into it," he replied calmly, "with a child." Her fingers tightened in her lap. "I walked into a building," she corrected. "I didn't know you were getting married." He turned then, slowly, the city lights catching in his eyes. "And if you had?" She hesitated, then told the truth. "I still would have come." Silence fell between them, not empty, weighted. Her son leaned closer to her instinctively, sensing the shift even if he didn't understand it. She rested a hand on his shoulder, grounding herself as much as him. The man's gaze dropped again, to the boy. "Does he know?" he asked. Rachel swallowed. "He knows I'm his mother. He knows we don't talk about his father." "Why?" "Because I didn't want him growing up afraid of a man he never met." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You decided that for both of us," he said. "Yes, because if she hadn't, fear would have eaten her alive. Because loving him had once meant living on the edge of things she couldn't control." She stood then, needing distance, pacing toward the opposite end of the room before she lost the nerve to say what had been weighing on her chest for 4 years. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," she said quietly. That got his attention. "I left because staying meant becoming someone I didn't recognize anymore." He watched her closely now. "You were safe." She laughed once, humorless. "I was protected," she corrected. "There's a difference." He didn't interrupt. She took that as permission. I woke up every morning wondering what part of myself I'd have to trade to keep surviving your world. I didn't want that for him. She glanced at her son, who was now lining toy cars he'd found on the table, completely unaware of the conversation reshaping his future. I wanted him to grow up knowing he could choose. The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, slowly. And what about me? The question landed heavier than she expected. What about you? She echoed. He stepped closer, not too close, but enough that she felt the shift in space. You disappeared, he said. No goodbye, no explanation. Her throat burned. I wrote you letters, she admitted. Every one of them ended up in the trash. His eyes flickered. You never sent them. No, she said softly. Because if I had, I would have come back, and I couldn't. Silence again. Her son looked up then, curiosity bright in his eyes. Mama? He asked, innocent as sunlight. Is he my dad? The room stopped breathing. Rachel felt the world tilt. She hadn't planned for this moment. Not today. Not like this. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He waited. She knelt in front of her son, meeting his gaze, her voice steady even as her heart raced. He's someone important from my past, she said carefully. Someone who helped me once. The boy considered this, then looked at the man again. You're very tall, he said seriously. Rachel almost laughed. The man crouched then, bringing himself to eye level without being asked. Do you know your name? He asked gently. The boy nodded. Eli. A pause. And how old are you, Eli? 4.5, he said proudly. The man nodded once, then looked up at Rachel. Not demanding, waiting. She felt something crack open inside her. Yes, she said quietly. He's yours. The truth settled into the room like a slow, unstoppable force. The man didn't react the way she'd imagined during sleepless nights. No explosion, no accusation, no rage. He closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, his voice was steady, but different. How long did you plan to keep this from me? I didn't plan, she whispered. I survived. He stood, turned away. She thought for one terrifying moment that she had lost him forever. Then he spoke. You should have trusted me. Her voice broke. I trusted you with my heart. That was the problem. He turned back to her, the weight of responsibility settling visibly on his shoulders. This changes everything. Yes, she agreed. He was seeing her for the first time, and the last all at once. You can't leave again, he said calmly. She stiffened. I didn't come to be owned. His gaze sharpened. You came because something forced your hand. She hesitated, because that part hadn't been planned either. Someone knows about Eli, she admitted. His stillness vanished. Who? She shook her head. I don't know yet, but they contacted me. They knew his name. His school. The air in the room shifted instantly. This time, it wasn't memory. It was threat. He reached for his phone, issuing quiet instructions that sounded nothing like panic. Rachel watched him, heart pounding, knowing she had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. When he finished, he looked at her. You're staying, he said firmly. Both of you. I don't want him raised in your world. His reply was immediate. He won't be raised in fear. She searched his face for a promise she could trust. And your fiancé? A shadow crossed his expression. There is no wedding. She exhaled shakily. Outside the room, footsteps approached. He glanced toward the door, listening. His voice lowered. Whatever is coming, he said, it's already too close. Rachel's heart dropped. Why? Because the door opened. And the man standing there didn't look like Staff. He looked like the past, refusing to stay buried. The man met Rachel's eyes first, then looked at the child and smiled. The man at the door didn't rush inside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look surprised. He stood there as if he belonged, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe, his posture relaxed enough to feel intentional. the kind of ease that came from knowing exactly how much damage a single sentence could do. Rachel felt it instantly, the tightening in her chest, the instinctive pull to place herself between him and her son. Eli, sensing the shift, stepped closer to her leg. "Mama," he whispered. She rested a hand on his shoulder, grounding herself, even as her pulse began to race. The man's gaze flicked to Eli again, lingering, assessing. Then he smiled. "Relax," he said smoothly. "I'm not here to make a scene." The words didn't calm her. They chilled her. Behind her, she felt the presence of the man she had once loved move closer, not crowding her, not touching her, but standing in a way that made it clear she wasn't alone. Control without display, authority without noise. The newcomer finally looked up, his eyes meeting the Mafia boss's with a familiarity that made Rachel's stomach drop. "So," he said lightly, "you found her." The room seemed to shrink. "Leave," the Mafia boss said, not loudly, not threateningly. The man chuckled. "You always did have a way of claiming things without asking." Rachel stiffened at the word, things. She took a step forward before either of them could stop her. "He's not a thing," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "And neither am I." The man's smile widened. "Of course not," he said. "Your leverage." The word hit her like ice water. She felt the Mafia boss shift behind her, felt the tension ripple through the room, subtle but unmistakable. But he didn't speak, not yet. The man continued undeterred. "I told you she'd come back," he said casually, as if speaking to an old colleague. "People always return to what they can't outrun." Rachel's mind raced. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man tilted his head. "Someone who understands consequences." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "But it's the only one that matters." Her son tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," Eli whispered again, "why is he looking at me like that?" The question cut deeper than any threat. Rachel knelt instantly, cupping her son's face. "Hey," she said softly, "go sit on the chair, okay? Just for a minute." Eli hesitated, his eyes darting between the two men. The Mafia boss spoke then, his voice calm, deliberate. "Eli," he said gently, "can you help me with something?" The boy blinked. "What? Can you count how many lights are on in this room?" Eli considered this seriously, then nodded and moved toward the corner, beginning to count under his breath. Rachel exhaled shakily. When she stood again, the room felt different, sharper. The man at the door watched the exchange with interest. "Protective," he remarked. "That's new." "Say what you came to say," the Mafia boss replied evenly. "Then leave." The man sighed theatrically. Straight to business, then. He reached into his jacket slowly, not for a weapon, but for a folded envelope. Rachel's heart stuttered. "I know where he goes to school," the man said calmly. "What time his bus arrives. Which teacher walks him out when it rains." Rachel felt the room tilt. "You don't want to do this," she whispered. He met her gaze. "I already have." The Mafia boss moved then, just a single step forward. The man noticed, held up a hand. "Easy," he said. "I'm not threatening him." Rachel's breath came shallow. "Then, what are you doing?" He smiled thinly. "I'm reminding you both that some truths don't stay buried." The Mafia boss's voice was low. "What do you want?" The man's gaze lingered on Rachel. "Her..." Silence crashed into the room. "No," Rachel said immediately. The man's eyes flicked to her. "Not like that," he clarified. "I don't want her body. I want her choice." The Mafia boss didn't move. "You won't get either." The man shrugged. "That depends." Rachel's chest tightened. "On what?" He held up the envelope. "On whether you want your son to grow up surrounded by guards and shadows, or somewhere quieter." Rachel's pulse thundered in her ears. "This isn't a choice," she said. "It's extortion." He smiled again. "All choices feel that way when the stakes are high." She turned to the mafia boss, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay composed. What is he talking about? The man she loved didn't look away. He's offering you a lie, he said calmly, wrapped in the illusion of safety. The man laughed softly. Says the one whose life is built on risk. Rachel felt the weight of it all press down on her. The past, the power, the child caught between worlds. Say it plainly, she demanded, looking at the man at the door. What do you want me to do? His gaze softened, just enough to be convincing. Leave, he said. Walk away with the boy. Disappear again. No lawyers, no battles, no blood. Rachel's stomach twisted. And him? She asked, nodding toward the mafia boss. The man smiled. He'll survive. He always does. Rachel closed her eyes, because this was the nightmare she'd always feared. Not danger, not violence, but choice. If she stayed, her son would grow up inside a world of power and protection, but also constant attention. If she left, she could give him quiet, at the cost of tearing him away from his father. The mafia boss spoke then, his voice steady but low. This is not your burden alone. She opened her eyes. But it is my choice, she whispered. The man at the door nodded approvingly. Exactly. Rachel looked at her son, still counting lights, blissfully unaware that his future was being weighed in silence. She looked at the man she had once loved, whose gaze held pain he didn't voice. Then she took a breath and made a decision. I'll go, she said quietly. The room froze. The mafia boss's eyes darkened, not with anger, but something far worse. Finality. The man at the door smiled. Good, he said. Pack light. Rachel's heart shattered. She hadn't yet realized. She had just stepped into a trap far deeper than she imagined. Because as the man turned to leave, he said one last thing without looking back. Oh, and Rachel? She swallowed. You have 48 hours. The door closed, and behind it, the war truly began. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling as the city breathed beyond the glass. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of traffic, the distant siren, the soft click of a door. Somewhere down the hall. 48 hours. The number repeated in her mind until it lost meaning and became something heavier. A. Countdown without a clock. She turned her head slightly, watching her son sleep beside her. Eli's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, peaceful in a way that made her ache. He had no idea that his future had already been negotiated in a room he'd never remember. She pressed a hand over her mouth, steadying herself. This was what she had wanted once: quiet, distance, a life without shadows. But now she understood the cost. The door opened softly. She didn't jump. She had been expecting him. The man she loved stood in the doorway, jacket removed now, sleeves rolled back. He looked tired, not physically, but in a way that came from carrying too much for too long. You're not leaving with him, he said quietly. Rachel sat up. I told you, she whispered. I made my choice. You made it under pressure, he replied. That doesn't make it final. She swung her legs off the bed, keeping her voice low so she wouldn't wake Eli. If I stay, she said, he escalates. He already knows too much. He only knows what he's been allowed to see, the mafia boss replied calmly. She looked at him then, really looked. You have a plan, she said. Not a question, and he didn't deny it. He wants you to disappear, he said. He believes distance gives him leverage. And doesn't it? She asked. He shook his head once. It gives him exposure. Rachel frowned. Explain. He stepped further into the room but stopped short of the bed, respecting the space she'd never had to ask for. He assumes I'll react the way I always have, he continued. Contain the threat, remove the problem. Her chest tightened. But you won't. No, he said. This time I let him think he's winning. A chill ran through her. What does that mean for us? It means, he said evenly, that you don't leave because you're being chased. She swallowed. You leave because you choose to. The distinction mattered more than she wanted to admit. And Eli? She asked. His gaze softened when it shifted to their son. He doesn't go anywhere I can't reach him, he said. Ever. Rachel shook her head. You can't protect him from everything. No, he agreed, but I can change the battlefield. She studied him, heart pounding. And what if he's wrong? She whispered. What if letting that man believe he's in control puts Eli at risk? The mafia boss didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. Every move I've ever made carried risk, he said. But this is the first time I'm willing to lose. Everything if it keeps him safe. The words landed hard. You'd do that? She asked. For him, he said. Then, after a pause, and for you. Rachel felt something inside her crack, not fear, not doubt, but the last fragile wall she'd built to survive without him. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, a knock, soft, controlled. The mafia boss straightened. Rachel's pulse spiked. That's him, she whispered. No, he said calmly. That's my man. The door opened, and a tall figure stepped inside, speaking quietly. He's moved his timeline, the man said. He wants them gone by morning. Rachel's breath caught. Morning? She echoed. The mafia boss nodded once. Good. Good. The word felt wrong. He turned to Rachel. Pack, he said. Only what you need for 2 days. Her heart raced. You said 48 hours? I said he did, the mafia boss replied. I didn't. Her pulse thundered. Where are we going? He held her gaze. Somewhere he thinks you'd never choose. The drive began before dawn. Rachel sat in the back seat with Eli sleeping against her shoulder, watching the city fall away. Through tinted glass. The mafia boss sat in front, silent, focused. She didn't know where they were going, only that every turn felt deliberate. They stopped at a modest house just as the sky began to lighten. No guards, no visible security, just quiet. This is a mistake, she whispered. He turned in his seat. This is exactly where he'll look last. Inside, the house felt lived in, warm, almost ordinary. Rachel frowned. You own this? He nodded. It belonged to my mother. Something shifted. You never brought me here, she said softly. I didn't want you tied to it, he replied. They settled Eli in the guest room. For the first time since the wedding, Rachel felt something like stillness, until her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. You left early. Her stomach dropped. Another message followed. You should have said goodbye. She looked up, panic flashing across her face. He knows, she whispered. The mafia boss took the phone, reading calmly. Then he smiled, not with amusement, with certainty. He thinks you ran, he said. Rachel's voice shook. Didn't I? No, he replied. You walked exactly where I needed you to. Her heart raced. What are you doing? He met her gaze. Ending this. Outside, a car slowed at the edge of the property. Not stopping, just watching. Rachel felt the weight of it all settle in her chest, because she realized then, she wasn't the bait, she was the key, and whatever came next would change all of them forever. Rachel woke to silence that felt unfamiliar. Not the hollow quiet of fear or the watchful stillness of guarded spaces, but something softer, domestic, the kind of silence that existed in early mornings before the world remembered how loud it could be. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard Eli breathing beside her. Slow, even, safe. Her chest loosened just enough for her to breathe. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, touching the edges of the room in pale gold. The house smelled faintly of coffee and something warm baking. Bread, maybe. A memory surfaced. Uninvited. Mornings long ago when she used to imagine what a life like this might feel like. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake her son. The events of the last 24 hours returned in fragments. The wedding, the door, the man who had smiled too easily, the ultimatum, had looked at her when he said ending this. She rose quietly and followed the sound of movement toward the kitchen. He was already awake. Standing at the counter, sleeves rolled, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and even. Not angry, not rushed, measured. "I don't care what he thinks he has," he said calmly. "I care about what he's hiding." Rachel paused in the doorway, watching him. This was the side of him she'd tried not to remember. The strategist, not the soldier. The man, who saw 3 steps ahead and never moved without understanding the cost. He ended the call and turned, already aware she was there. "You should eat," he said, "before Eli wakes." She nodded, then hesitated. "You said he exposed himself by pushing us to leave early." He poured coffee into a mug and slid it across the counter without answering immediately. "He broke a pattern," he said finally. "What pattern?" "He's been careful for years," the Mafia boss replied. "Never direct, never personal, always letting others do the work." Rachel's stomach tightened. Until now. Until Eli. She wrapped her hands around the mug, grounding herself. "So what happens now?" He leaned back against the counter, studying her. Not like a threat, not like a possession, but like a variable that mattered. "Now," he said, "we let the truth surface where he can't bury it." The word truth settled heavily in her chest. "You mean exposure?" "Yes." Her pulse quickened. "That puts Eli in the spotlight." He shook his head. "Not the way you think." Rachel didn't miss the careful wording. "What aren't you telling me?" He met her gaze steadily. "He didn't just find you by accident." She already knew that. "You said he had a connection to your past." "Yes." And he was banking on you remembering only part of it." Rachel's chest tightened. "Explain." He moved to the table, spreading out several documents, old yellowed copies mixed with recent printouts, names, dates, photographs. Her stomach dropped as she recognized one face immediately. "You told me he was gone," she whispered. "I told you he disappeared," the Mafia boss corrected. "Those are not the same thing." Rachel's hands trembled as she picked up the photo. The man from the doorway. Younger, sharper, standing beside the Mafia boss in a picture taken, long before everything had fractured. "You worked together," she said. "Yes." "Then what happened?" The Mafia boss exhaled slowly. "He crossed a line." Rachel looked up. "What line?" He hesitated, just enough for her to notice. "The kind that doesn't heal," he said quietly. Rachel's chest ached. "And now?" "Now he wants leverage that doesn't trace back to him." Her blood ran cold. "You think he planned this?" she said. "That he knew about Eli before he ever contacted me?" "Yes." Rachel sat heavily in the chair, "So I wasn't the trigger." "No," he said. "You were the pressure point." Silence fell between them. Her voice came out small. "Then this is my fault." He was across the room instantly, not touching her, but close enough that she felt his presence, like gravity. "No," he said firmly. "This is not something you caused." She looked up at him, eyes burning. "Then why does it feel like every step I take puts him closer to danger?" He softened then, just slightly. "Because you're a mother," he said. "And fear lies to you." Rachel swallowed. "What's the plan?" He straightened, the strategist returning. "We give him what he thinks he wants." Her heart stuttered. "You want me to go back?" "No," he said immediately. "I want him to believe you might." Rachel's breath caught. "And if he calls my bluff?" "He won't," the Mafia boss replied calmly, "because he doesn't believe you have another. Move." Rachel stared at him. "And do I?" He held her gaze. "You do now." The hours that followed were quiet but heavy. Eli played in the living room, unaware of the currents shifting beneath his small routines. Rachel watched him constantly, every laugh a fragile thing she didn't trust herself to hold too tightly. By afternoon, the message came. Not to her phone, to the Mafia bosses. He read it without reacting, then looked up at Rachel. "He wants a meeting," he said. Her heart pounded. "Where?" "Public." She exhaled shakily. "Of course he does." "He wants witnesses," the Mafia boss continued, "or the illusion of them. And you?" "I want him comfortable." Rachel stood. "Then I'm coming." He shook his head. "No." "I'm the reason he's moving," she said firmly. "I won't be the reason you're blind." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Stay close." The cafe was busy in the way only places near business districts ever were. People coming and going, conversations layered over one another like white noise. Rachel sat across from the man who had once stood beside her at the altar of a future that never happened. He smiled when he saw her. "You look well," he said. She didn't return the smile. "You wanted to talk?" "Yes," he replied easily. "I wanted to see if you'd choose differently this time." She leaned forward. "I want my son safe." His eyes flickered. "Then you understand my position." Her stomach twisted. "And yours?" she asked. He laughed softly. "I want what was taken from me." She stiffened. "You mean control?" "I mean balance," he corrected. "You know how dangerous imbalance can be." Rachel's voice hardened. "You're using a child." His gaze sharpened. "I'm preventing chaos." The Mafia boss spoke then, calm as ever. "You're exposed." The man chuckled. "You think so?" "Yes," he replied, "and you know it." A pause. Then the man leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You wouldn't dare." The Mafia boss's voice didn't change. "Watch me." Rachel felt the shift instantly. This wasn't negotiation anymore. This was a countdown. The man stood. "You're making a mistake," he said to Rachel. "You could still walk away." She rose too, heart pounding. "I already did," she said quietly. "Once." He studied her, really studied her, for the first time. Then he smiled again. "We'll see." He left without another word. Rachel turned to the Mafia boss, breath shaky. "What happens now?" He met her gaze. "Now," he said, "we see who blinks first." As they left the cafe, Rachel felt it, eyes on her back, the weight of something larger closing in. Because she finally understood. This wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about truth. And once truth surfaced, someone was going to lose everything. Because that night, Rachel received a message she wasn't meant to see. Proof that the man threatening her son wasn't acting alone. The message arrived just after midnight. Rachel was awake when her phone vibrated, staring at the ceiling in the quiet house that no longer felt temporary. Eli slept beside her, one arm thrown across his pillow, his breathing steady, and unaware of how close the world had come to tilting beneath him. She reached for the phone instinctively and froze. The sender wasn't unknown. It was a contact she didn't recognize, but the number was saved on the Mafia boss's phone. Her pulse quickened. She unlocked the screen. "He's not alone." He never was. "And if you let this go public, your son will pay the price." Attached was a file. Rachel didn't open it. She didn't need to, because she already knew what it contained. Proof. Not of violence, but of influence. People in positions that were never meant to be touched. Names that moved quietly through. Courts, schools, contracts, and signatures. A network built not on brutality, but on silence. She swallowed hard. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about exposure. Rachel slipped out of bed carefully and stepped into the hallway, closing the door softly behind her. The house was dark except for a faint glow from the study. He was awake. Of course he was. The Mafia boss sat at the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his attention fixed on the same. Documents she'd seen earlier, only now there were more. He looked up the moment she entered. "You saw it," he said quietly. She nodded. "He knows I'd look at your phone." "Yes. And he wanted me to." The Mafia boss leaned back slowly. "He's forcing the decision into your hands." Rachel's chest tightened. "Because he thinks you won't move without me." "And he's right," he replied calmly. The honesty in his voice undid her more than any argument could have. Rachel crossed the room and sat opposite him. "If this goes public," she said carefully, "it doesn't just end him." "No," he agreed, "it ends everything built around him." "People who had nothing to do with Eli?" "Yes." "And if it doesn't go public?" she asked. He met her gaze steadily. "Then he disappears quietly, the way men like him always have." Rachel closed her eyes. This was the choice she'd been running from, not between safety and danger, but between justice and consequence, between ending one threat and reshaping a world her son would inherit. "You could protect Eli either way," she said softly. "Yes. But only one of those choices teaches him something," she whispered. The Mafia boss was silent. Rachel opened her eyes. "What kind of man do you want him to become?" The question settled heavily between them. Not accusation, not manipulation. Truth. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the sleeping city. "I built my life believing control was protection," he said quietly. "That if I held enough power, nothing could touch the people I loved." Rachel stood beside him. "And now?" "And now," he continued, "I see that power without restraint creates the very monsters it claims. To stop." She looked at him. "You don't want him growing up inside this." "No," he said. "I want him growing up knowing why we left it behind." Her heart pounded. "Then say it," she whispered. He turned to her. "I will expose them." The words were calm, final. Rachel exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "What does that cost you?" His lips curved into a sad smile. "Everything that made this world easy." She nodded. "And what does it give you?" His gaze flicked toward the hallway where Eli slept. "A future that isn't built on fear." The next 48 hours moved faster than anything Rachel had ever lived through. Not raids, not chaos, but release. Documents were sent, records surfaced, quiet deals unraveled in the daylight where they had no business existing. Names appeared where they never should have. The man who had smiled in the doorway vanished. Not violently, not dramatically. He simply stopped existing in the world he'd controlled. And the network collapsed under the weight of its own exposure. Rachel watched it unfold from a distance, Eli playing at her feet, blissfully untouched. On the third day, the Mafia boss came home without his phone, without his guards, without the armor he'd worn for decades. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, hands empty. "It's done," he said. She searched his face. "And you?" "I stepped away," he replied. "From all of it." Her breath caught. "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "If I want this to mean something." Rachel nodded slowly. That night, they stood in the backyard, watching Eli chase fireflies beneath a sky that felt wider than it had in years. "He deserves a normal life," she said quietly. "Yes," he replied, "and he'll have one." She turned to him. "And us?" He hesitated, then spoke with quiet certainty. "We'll build something slower," he said, "something honest." She studied him, the man who had once ruled through silence and fear, now choosing. Uncertainty because it was right. "That scares me," she admitted. He smiled faintly. "It should." She laughed softly. And for the first time, it didn't feel like survival. Weeks later, they left the city. No announcements and no headlines, just absence. Rachel watched Eli run across an open field, laughter carried on the wind, free of shadows he would never need to understand. The man stood beside her, not as a boss, not as a protector, but as a father, as a choice. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull her closer. He simply held on, because the most powerful thing he had ever done was walk away. Some lives are built on control, others are built on courage, and the bravest choice of all is knowing when to let power go.